with the journey of the consultations for the development of the B-BBEE sector codes for the events, technical and production services industry. We've been very fortunate that we have had quite some time moving around at different parts of the country, in different provinces, as well as via different platforms like we've had webinars. As such, today we have an audience and participants of the sector stakeholders who are in our Microsoft Teams, and also a live audience seated down here at Invest SA, a one-stop shop. So on that note, welcome everyone. We're going to have a wonderful, wonderful session. And this is a history in the making, because the discussions of what we're doing here will then culminate into a sector code that is specifically looking after this industry, so that it can assist the industry to have more impact in terms of transformation. The session here today will start as it started now until 1 o'clock, so hang there, hang with us, and we enjoy, and we are actually encouraging the stakeholders to engage robustly with our capable panel seated here at the front, who are representing different associations that are relevant to this discussion. We do have speakers who will be elaborating more about the dynamics of the panel that you see in front of us, as well as the issues that are related to this discussion around B-BBEE. So on behalf of the Department of Sport, Arts and Culture, I welcome you all. I will not further delay. I would like to introduce our moderator, Ms. Julian Zemande, who is a BEE expert, and she will be taking over from here. Thank you very much. Enjoy the session. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Colin. Thank you for that. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Events, Technical and Production Services Sector Transformation Code. It's a mouthful, so early in the morning. There have been many of these roadshows, and we are very pleased, of course, to be in the mother city, Cape Town, today. I see the majority of you are joining us online and virtual. I myself would have prepared to have a face-to-face interaction with yourself, but may it be. My name is Julian Zemande, and I will moderate during this session. I'll give a short introduction and welcome, as I just did. I outline the objectives and the purpose of these roadshows, and inform you of the structure of the BEE codes and any technical questions that you might have if necessary. It's really your time to engage with the panelists and have a discussion with the panelists on the codes. After this little intro, I will hand it over to the chairperson of the Events Technical Production Forum. He will give you a brief presentation, and then the core of the session is really your question and answers, which we'll hope to answer. So why are we gathered here today? Well, it all started in 2012, I'm not giving my age away, when the DTI was approached by members and organizations in your sector with the request to a specific sector code for the events, technical and production sector. A forum was set up comprising of representatives of your various subsectors, and a number of robust and very lively debates were held. And I can testify one thing: this team hit the ground running. And therefore, after 12 years, we're here to present to you the proposed draft events codes, which really the aim is for it to be, as soon as possible, gazetted in terms of Section 12 of the BEE Act. And that means that it just expresses your commitment to transformation. but it won't be legally binding on the private sector, organs of state and public entities. That will happen after, hopefully, 6 months, where you will still be given the opportunity to comment. Then the code after that will become a Section 9 code, and that means it's now legally binding. Like so many codes, this is a move away from the generic codes of good practice. So a generic code of good practice will apply to somebody, for instance, who's in catering. But there are 12 other sector codes. Tourism was the first. The Media and Advertising Code, we will mention that one later on. The ICT Code, for instance. There is, of course, the Financial Services Sector Codes, and then number 12 will be yours, hopefully very soon. That's where I'll leave it for now. I'm just looking at my notes, but I'd like to hand over to the chairperson of the forum, Mr. Opa Selemane. Thank you.
Good morning, colleagues. Thank you very much, Ms. Nzimande. As stated to you, our business today is to talk to you about this draft sector code. As you are aware, colleagues, that since the establishment of our democratic government in 1994, our society remains characterized by racially based income and social inequalities. And so the creation of the B-BBEE sector code is a mechanism aimed at addressing these inequalities and also to mobilize the energy of all South Africans so that we can all contribute towards a sustained economic growth, development, and social transformation in our country. When we started the forum, and specifically the development of the sector code, we identify challenges, and these challenges are the ones that really necessitated the establishment of this sector code. One of the challenges was that this sector is not regulated at all. We also noticed that a lot of black people have been used to be fronts in some of these entities. And of course, we also noticed that the transformation in our sector is happening at a very slow pace. And of course, in some instances, it is completely absent. And so we developed a vision, and our vision for the sector is to have a prosperous event, technical, and production services industry that is globally competitive, that is inclusive, made up of highly skilled and characterized by a shared growth and a strong commitment to human capital and the development of knowledge and skills. I'm now going to introduce you to the members of this forum. And remember, all the forum members come from the different associations. The first one that makes up the forum is EXA. EXA is short for Exhibitions and Events Association of Southern Africa. And today, EXA is represented by Ms. Leanne Elder. Please welcome her. We also have SACI. SACI stands for South African Association for the Conference Industry. And SACI in the forum is represented by my deputy chairperson, Mr. Kevin Jones. Unfortunately, he's not with us today. We also in the forum have IFIA. IFIA is short for International Festival and Events Association. IFIA in the forum is represented by Ms. Janet Landy, and she too, unfortunately, cannot join us. We also have in the forum SAMPA, short for South African Music Promoters Association, and SAMPA today in the forum is represented by its president, and please welcome Mr. China Mpololo. As mentioned also, my name is Opa Salimani. I also come from SAMPA as the Treasurer General of SAMPA. In the forum, we also have SACIA, short for Southern African Communications Industry Association, and SACIA is represented by, I made a mistake earlier and mixed the names. SACIA is represented by Mr. Kevin Jones, and SACI is represented today by Mr. Clinton Tikok. Please welcome him. We also have TUMSA. TUMSA is short for Trade Union for Musicians of South Africa. And TUMSA in the forum is represented by its Secretary General. And ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Kebileru. We also have IPO in the forum. IPO is short for Independent Producers Organization. And today, IPO is represented by Mr. Quinton Fredericks. Please welcome him. We also have two organizations, SAIC and SIPA, short for respectively South African Events Council and Council of Event Professionals Africa. Both organizations are represented by Ms. Sue Gannon. Unfortunately, Ms. Sue Gannon is not here with us. Lastly, but not the least, is an organization called SARA, short for South African Roadies Association. And this organization is the one that actually kickstarted this process of the establishment of the forum. When its president, Mr. Freddie Nyatela, approached Parliament and made certain complaints regarding the lack of transformation in our sector. And today, SARA is represented by its president. Please welcome Mr. Freddie Nyatela. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm now going to do a presentation to you, and I would request that you allow me to do this full presentation. At the end of it, I'll give you an opportunity to ask whatever question you'd like to file towards us. Over the last few years, individuals from various organizations and associations in our sector have put aside their differences so that they can work together in the development of the industry-specific B-BBEE scorecard for our sector. Some of these organizations, of course, represent individuals. Some represent companies. Of course, some of the people think that our proposed codes go very far, and others also believe that these codes do not go far enough. However, despite our differences, we finally agreed on a document that we feel comfortable sending it out to you, the stakeholders, for further comment and input so that we collectively, with you, can develop the scorecard which will specifically serve our sector code. During the last couple of months, we've hosted several webinars, and we've also undertaken public engagements in which we were sharing the feedback on our work and of course inviting the different interested parties to share their input. We've also listened to their feedback and made several changes to the initial draft, not only once, but of course on several occasions. The first updated draft scorecard was published in the Government Gazette of November 2022. And of course, we leave this Gazette open for further public inputs. If you go onto the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture website, you'll find it there, and you'll be able to make further inputs into this document. And during this period, of course, we'll continue with our public engagements. Today, it's the last of the series that we've had. And we've visited many provinces. Wherever our stakeholders are based, we've been there, giving them an opportunity to learn about the implementation of this scorecard and how this scorecard will impact on the employers, how it will impact on the employees, and how it will impact on the freelance community that is so critical to the workings of the technical production and the live events sector. Why is this important, and why is it only now that we're getting into it? And this is the question that we've been asked since we started these public engagements. And if we do need a scorecard, why now, when the events and the audiovisual industry has been decimated by the COVID pandemic of the past couple of years? It has also been devastated by the lack of funding and so many other factors that are influencing our sector. In exploring whether we should develop our own scorecard or use the generic one, we move from the premise that the events, technical, production services sector is a very unique one. Our sector tends to have small companies with a very low headcount of highly skilled and experienced people. We employ freelancers as our needs dictate, and our revenues also tend to fluctuate enormously because of our activities that are basically project-based. The generic scorecard is a rudimentary tool that is designed to be used across the multiple industries. That is designed the structure of the organization is stable and fundamentally different to that we find in our sector. What we are proposing then is to develop the scorecard that allows us to implement a transformation agenda within our industry that is specific to our needs. We need this to be developed, of course, with your input, and it needs to make this scorecard work for our sector. Who is covered by this scorecard? The scorecard covers a variety of event formats, including sport, entertainment and business events. It includes exhibitions, incentive tours, film, television, and audiovisual productions. It also includes a range of activities hosted at a stadium, at a venue, or an audiovisual production facility. It even includes events hosted in a virtual online space. It's so broad-based spectrum of activities that cuts across the several other industry sectors. And we are aware that in its breadth, there may be companies who are confused about where they fall. Does an event venue fall under the tourism sector code, for instance? Does a commercial producer fall under the marketing, advertising, and communication sector code? Or does a company hosting a virtual event fall under the ICT sector? Our guideline response is very simple. This charter applies to any company or any entity that generates a revenue more than 50% of their annual turnover in this sector. We've spoken in the past when we started our engagements with the Tourism Charter Council, and of course we are in agreement on how these entities would fall into. For instance, if you are an event venue that offers only accommodation to event delegates, you can argue that you fall under the Tourism Charter Council. But if you generate more than 50% of your annual turnover from the same events industry, this is of course the scorecard that you are obliged to use. The same applies to audiovisual production companies. If your primary business is producing advertising material, you'll fall under the MAC sector code. If your primary business is producing entertainment for film, television, or multimedia platforms, this, of course, then is the scorecard that you are obliged to lose. In August of 2021, National Film and Video Foundation released their 2021 economic assessment study that looked at the state of transformation in the audiovisual sector. They concluded that overall, there are very low levels of inclusion and slow transformation in the audiovisual industry. This is a particular challenge at higher skills level within the same industry where there's very limited transformation. They recognize, of course, that the audiovisual sector has made a steady progress on the transformation front in terms of the employment and management aspect, but there's been limited progress on the ownership aspect. Their report specifically highlights the lack of self-sufficient and sustainable Black-owned film enterprises. It also describes how, beyond the public sector, Black filmmakers and producers often cannot raise or access funding required in order to build a sustainable business. In the events industry, we've done also a similar research where we find high barriers to the entry for venues and technical production companies because of the high capital costs that are involved. There are almost no barriers to entry for event organizers who don't require a high capital investment, but events on its own, it's a high-risk business, and despite the low-risk barrier to entry, and perhaps even because of it, there's a high failure rate for startup business and slow transformation in the same industry. As with the audiovisual sector, transformation at higher skills level within the industry has been painfully slow. Black-owned technical production companies find it very difficult to raise capital or even access private funding. And of course, there's been very limited opportunity in that same sector for training and skills development, particularly the business skills that you are requiring for business ownership or the management thereof. And now I want to go directly into the scorecard itself. And the first area I want to highlight is the radical transformation that we've undertaken as the events technical services production sector. In order to address these issues, we've of course taken a very long look at the core elements of the B-BBEE scorecard and thus radically increase the transformation targets for ownership, for management control, and skills development. As you can see, I've highlighted them in red. If you look on the left column of the generic and compare it to our scorecard, in the ownership scale, as you can see, the generic scorecard scores it at 25, we've increased it to 42. We've also increased the points needed to achieve the various B-BBEE levels so that while there are more points available in each category, their targets are also raised similarly. In dealing with one of the critical elements, which is the ownership, I want now to share with you a few examples of how our proposed scorecard deviates from the generic one. And a good place, of course, to start is with the ownership targets. In this instance, the target for the exercisable voting rights in an entity held by black people is increased from 25% plus 1 voting share to a mammoth 40%, as you can see on the slide there. Our objective here is basically to incentivize companies and entities to increase black participation in the industry boards. But the reward for achievement of that is also increased from the 4 weighting points, as you can see on the scorecard, to a big 10 weighting points. Still on the ownership, we've also increased the targets for the economic interest in which black people are entitled from 25% in the generic scorecard, as you can see, to again a big 40% in our scorecard, with, of course, a corresponding increase in the weighting points that accrue. We've proposed, of course, a significant increase in the targets related to the economic interests of black persons in shared ownership schemes and cooperatives, raising the targets, as you can see from the scorecard of the generic scorecard, from 4% to 20%, so that we encourage black people to embrace empowerment structures, and to encourage also companies to sell shares to their employees. We are looking for a greater equity participation from SAF and also communities from which these entities do operate. When you look at the management element, which is one of the critical elements of our scorecard, one of the big concerns identified in the research that we carried out ourselves and also from NFVF that I spoke of earlier, revolved around the failure of black employees to progress into middle management position. And so we've proposed a target to address this bottleneck and create an opportunity for junior employees to progress in their career. This target, I must mention, colleagues, does not exist in the generic scorecard. And we've introduced it here in response to the specific challenges that exist in both the film and our events industry. In relation to the supply and enterprise development element, we've also gone drastically high, where we've doubled the targets for the supply and enterprise development. By so doing, we're encouraging companies not only to create employment opportunities for their own staff, but also to create black-owned supply chain that can feed into their businesses. On the skills development element, where companies are expected to spend money, we've also increased the target that is allocated to training and skills development, specifically because we want to encourage the on-the-job training, the mentorship, and work integrated learning, as well as the more formal education that would lead to an award of a qualification or a professional designation. On socio-economic development element, which is the last element I'm talking to you about, we finally also increased the targets for this element because we believe that the events industry in particular has the potential to offer employment opportunities and feed into a much broader event community. We've often seen the development of micro-enterprises that can contribute to events with the production of local craft products. Now, you will also might not be aware that from this sector, our sector, 30% of South Africans are working outside the country. While we've published our draft B-BBEE scorecard, it is certainly a work in progress that will be amended based on your input and the feedback that we're going to get from this session. This is your opportunity to collaborate with us in the development of the industry-specific scorecard that will help promote the B-BBEE agenda without throttling the economic recovery of the sector, especially after the past 2 years of the COVID pandemic. We also recognize that our sector has been devastated by the restrictions that have been imposed on us over the last couple of years, and we are aware that many companies in our event sector have scaled down substantially, to the point that many now exist only as a name or on a letterhead or on the outside of an empty building. In our sector, more than 30% of our audiovisual technical crew are now working in the Middle East, in areas such as Qatar, the UAE, in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and so on and so on. The technical crew in those areas are working on very interesting and groundbreaking projects that look so great on their CVs. They're earning very hard currency, and they're earning in a tax-free environment. We've no idea whether these people will come back to South Africa. But we are aware that if we don't create commercial opportunities in our own country and in our sector, not only will it leave those people moved away and stay away forever, but the brain drain, of course, will continue, and our ability to host the world-class events that we've hosted in the past, such as the 2010 FIFA, most recently the BRICS Summit, will of course evaporate. Training is obviously a part of the solution, but there's a shortage of so many young people entering this industry. And at a time when we need more of such people, less of these people are available. And finally, colleagues, this is a draft document. It is work in progress. Our sector is facing real economic challenges, and we desperately need to focus on reviving the sector in order to create a sustainable future for all of us. At the same time, we need to, one, address the historic inequalities and create economic opportunities for Black people. Two, we also need to promote the training and skills development as a tool for economic recovery. Three, we also need to accelerate the transformation at a higher skills level by creating structured career paths. Four, we should also encourage the cooperation and collaboration between established and emerging Black-owned businesses. And lastly, we must create opportunities for Black-owned businesses to access funding for capital expenditure and for the business development. This, colleagues, it's not just a tick box exercise in which we play lip service to the principle of public participation. This is a scorecard that will impact everyone in our sector. So whether you are a supporter of B-BBEE or not, for now it is irrelevant. You can either participate in the development of this scorecard, that of course serves our interests, or you can live with the consequences of a clumsy generic one that has been imposed on us without any consideration for the structure and the culture of our events, technical and production sector. The choice is yours. I want to thank you, and we open the floor for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to the chairperson. And as he so rightfully says, I think we can open now for question and answers. I firstly like to give the people who are with us today a round of applause. Thank you for coming. And because you've made the effort to meet with us face to face, I was just wondering, we'll give the first round of questions, if you have any, to the floor. Is that fine, forum members? I think that will be the right thing. And maybe just a question to the people, the audience. How many of you are in the film industry? Can you raise your hands? 2. How many are in the other sectors, events, production? Okay, thank you. Music industry? All right, no, thank you very much. Yes, I'd like to open the floor. I mean, are there any questions from the audience? Not now, we're all a bit shy. That's what happens when you get to Cape Town. I'd like to ask if there are any questions that we have received online.
There's 2 hands up, but I'm not sure how technically we can let them speak.
Okay.
So I thought we were going to read them.
Yeah, the best thing was, for people, could people online please write down their questions, because we have a little technical issue with, if you've raised your hands, we cannot, so if they could just write it down, that would be the best. So can...
There's a question at the back.
Oh, thank you, because I was talking now for 5 minutes all by myself. There we go.
Thank you. The name is Kokon Kalashe. I'm with Jazz in Native Yards, and we do live jazz promotion in the townships. Question is, first of all, thanks for the seemingly far-reaching objectives of your forum and for this BEE scorecard. But how is your committee making sure that it doesn't suffer the same negative impact that has affected the generic BEE regulations that have been put out? For instance, the funding, the training, the monitoring and evaluation, and all those things. How are you making sure that you don't fall into the same trap? Thank you. Thanks.
Let's get the second question.
Are you sure? I think you should answer first, then I'll answer mine.
No.
Are you sure?
Go
Okay.
ahead.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Nesli Nduta. First things first, well done to every one of you that has compiled this and worked in this forum. My first panic was like, I didn't see a representation of the foot soldiers, like basically the crew. But after I saw the presentation, like I can see you guys are well connected to your sectors and you understand the needs of the people on the ground. There's a few things that were mentioned, which is access to funding, especially for technical production companies, especially private funding. It's difficult to have good credit score when you don't have permanent employment. And when you're dealing with strikes that last 7 months and COVID pandemics and things like that. So my question is like, what is this forum doing to make funding available to especially people that are competent and have good business plans and have a good track record in the industry? And then my last question, I operate in the post-production sector, but within the principal photography. So I work as a visual effects coordinator, production manager. There's a new wave of technology that is coming into town, which is volume stages. And there's a lot of keen interest in this. We kind of do have the infrastructure for that. Thank you again to the government we have by building the Cape Town Film Studios and introducing things like the rebate. So I think there are a few players that are working together in trying to create something in that sector. And with the level of productions that are coming to our shores, there's going to be a demand for this. Now, my question there is, I've never really seen a clear post-production rebate. And if you look at like the visual effects department alone, the budget is pretty much slightly more than what the production companies spend here, but they take all of this work back home. And a lot of them, they've shown interest in working with local companies, but some local companies don't have the capacity. So which comes back to the training and development skills. So I just wanted to ask, like, will there ever be a post-production rebate that encompasses the production aspect, the principal photography aspects? Because there's a lot of work that gets done here, and I feel like if there were more rebates, the visual effects, the international visual effects producers would be willing to spend more money in the country and be able to work with local suppliers. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everybody. To both our in-house participants and also everybody that's online. Yeah, so just to answer the first question and even your second question, these are questions that have come up in both our engagement in Uppington last week by participants and then also in East London the week before. And it's obviously key issues that people are concerned about. So with regards to the question around how to avoid the disaster that you referred to in the application of the generic scorecard to our sector is precisely the reason why this scorecard process is so important and why we are inviting and requesting people to give comment and input into the scorecard document itself. Because as many people know, particularly in the audiovisual sector, we have had major challenges around the arbitrary interpretation of the generic scorecard with regards to the film and TV industry, particularly in 2022, when almost 25 companies in the IPO were issued with repudiations on their BEE credentials and were later found 90% of those companies were later found not to be in violation of the BEE scorecard at all, but only after protracted legal battles and a huge amount of finance expended on those legal costs. And so you can see the obvious benefits of us as a sector developing and adopting a scorecard that we inform and give impact to, because it means that we will have the final say as a BEE council that will be set up once this process is concluded, that will monitor the compliance and the verification of companies in terms of this particular scorecard. It also means that we will no longer be subject to the arbitrary interpretation of the provisions of the BEE scorecard as we've experienced as the audiovisual sector. So that, I hope that answers your question around the concerns and also how we will ensure that there is a measure of independence in terms of how companies are evaluated with regards to their compliance of this particular scorecard. And that BEE Council will be a statutory body established by the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture and constituted by representatives as of the sectors that you see seated here before you today. So to come to the second part of your question, which is my personal passion, is skills development and transfer, and also the development of the next generation of black HODs across all levels of the audiovisual sector. We have in place between the Independent Producers Organization and the SA Film Academy and MOU to precisely address this particular issue. And the SA Film Academy is an institution which I co-founded about 16 years ago with David Wicht of Film Africa, set up to facilitate the transfer of skills, not just at the entry level, but also at the intermediate and a senior level. And one of the areas where I think we have to acknowledge that there are challenges has been in the post-production sector, because it's such a highly specialized and technical sector where you literally have to spend years to develop a measure of competency to be able to work and operate in that particular subsector of the audiovisual sector. And in that instance, I think that we do have a provision in the existing DTIC film and TV rebate scheme where you can get an extra 5% of qualifying production expenditure if you do post in South Africa. But obviously, because of the high level of investment, particularly in international productions, there is a preference by international studios and streamers to do that post with companies and people that they are accustomed to working with, and that's why they take the bulk of that work offshore. And what we can do is use this particular argument to lobby for maybe an increase in the post-production rebate percentage on the basis that it will facilitate both skills transfer and transformation, but also increase the level of foreign direct investment into the country by having an extra few percentage points allocated to the rebate scheme for post-production. The other aspect of your question around the freelance community is another key issue that we've taken into account, is that how do we as a sector accommodate the aspirations and the ambitions of the freelance community? And in that respect, what we've done with the IPO, for example, is embarked on a professional designation process with the South African Creative Industries Association. So I'd like to speak to you afterwards to just share with you exactly what we're trying to do, and also to get your participation in that aspect of it, because it's key to growing that aspect of our sector that I think is critical both for employment but also skills transfer. Thanks.
Can I add to
Yeah.
what Quentin has just said in response to the first question
Yes,
by the
Chair.
gentleman at the back? Yeah, as mentioned by Quentin, this forum will become a charter council. It will receive reports from the different entities that are doing business in this sector. And so if we are there as the charter, it is our duty as the charter to look into compliance of all these entities that are in our sector. And of course, this we cannot do on our own without government. Remember, these entities benefit from tenders and contracts that the government is issuing. At this stage, we don't have a charter council. It's a forum until such time that it becomes a law. This is why it is easy for them to escape the compliance and transformation issues, because they use the generic scorecard, which is not really so applicable to our sector. Until such time that we finalize, as I mentioned earlier, this is our last of the session. We're going to consolidate the reports and the feedback from these sessions and put it again on the government gazette for a period of 3 months for any further inputs. And once that period lapses, the minister will then make it into law. And that would enable us as a forum to ensure that the issues that he had raised of the failures of the past where entities have not complied with our address will be there to ensure that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Gaby, you still want to? Did you just want?
Hi. My participation in the panel is from a labour perspective, representing a trade union for musicians. And just by virtue of that fact, I think some of the issues that you were addressing really is the principle of why such as historically has so little post-production been designated to be performed in the country as well. They would come here and do a fabulous shoot, wonderful locations, etc., and perhaps recruit some key production management individuals locally, but then most of the post-production would have been done offshore. And it stands to reason that trend has to be transformed as well. So transformation has got so many tentacles, and that's definitely one of them that local production companies need to bear in mind. Likewise, they need to be incentivized to do so. So lawmakers need to provide those incentives for them, which is what you were referring to, both in rebates, but also funding opportunities, etc., right through the bank. And I think the key issue here is that needs to be recognized is that it's not like in the old days where it's only companies with large resources to buy banks and banks of hardware and editing hardware and complicated technical systems, lots of them hardware-based, etc. Where these days, people with natural talent are skilling themselves as well because the technologies have become so much more accessible. For a very modest subscription monthly, you can get really world-class editing software on a very basic, fairly, well-operating laptop or a MacBook or a fairly powerful desktop computer. So I think people who provide employment or who've got their heart in this to remain South African and to become world players, but at the same time to contribute to the transformation that's so needed in the country, need to bear those things in mind, that they need to be also more on the lookout for people who already have some skills. They've skilled themselves. They haven't had the opportunity to go to campuses and academies. And if they do, fantastic. But there are so many youngsters we find in the music industry that we use the same software that any of the world-class hit producers, where the music is known worldwide. And if you go and see the technical resources used, we have all of those available, and many of the youngsters in the township are using the same software. So I think there's just something that I want to point out to all of us who are involved in this process of transformation. It's not like 10 years ago. There are people with skills available that you can bring in at a fairly low cost, and people who are hungry to work into your organization, and they are poised for movement throughout your organization to become a backbone of your organization. And if you are realistic about this process, that's what you'd be doing. Thanks.
I missed the last part of your question, which was about facilitating access to finance for particularly black-owned entrepreneurs. And this is an issue that's come up in all our public engagements. We know that we have agencies like the Small Enterprise Finance Agency, the Cooler Credit Guarantee Fund that's administered by the 5 big banks, and the Small Enterprise Development Agency. And again here, we recognize that the challenge has been that particularly around the Cooler Credit Guarantee Fund, for example, is that there's very little uptake because black entrepreneurs lack collateral. And these commercial banks are using the same lending criteria that they use in normal business transactions without consideration of the challenges faced by black entrepreneurs. And what we discussed, for example, after our engagement in the Northern Cape, where the same issue was raised by young aspirant entrepreneurs, is that we now, as the forum, have a duty to bring to attention these issues that have been raised by constituents in terms of how to access finance. Does it mean a review of the lending criteria, for example, with the Credit Guarantee Fund? Does it mean that the Small Enterprise Development Agency and financing agencies need to also reconsider some of how they evaluate applications, including agencies like the National Youth Development Agency? And in the past, the DTIC had an incubator fund that was discontinued. Do we need for that fund to be reinstated because of the challenges faced by black entrepreneurs? So we've taken into account and are cognizant of all these issues that will go into our presentations to the relevant ministries with regards to these challenges in terms of how to facilitate the landscape for companies to meet these targets, but also to support enterprise development, particularly amongst black and female-owned businesses. Thanks.
Thank you. Have we kind of answered the first question that was raised? You're quite comfortable with the answer given. In regard to that's the way we'll make sure that any negative impact by BEE felt from the generic codes, that we sort of mitigate that as much as we can. Foreign members, there's a question that was posted online, and I will read it out. The question is from the chairperson of Animation SA, Nick Kluter, and his question is as follows. The turnover threshold on the Events Technical Production Code is below 5 million. When compared to the 10 million threshold on the generic code of good practice and the next sector code. His question is as follows. Is it possible to increase the threshold to be 10 million as contained in the generic code and the next sector code? Who would like to answer that question?
Give it to Leon.
Thank you.
Morning, everybody. Thank you very much for your question. The document is on the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture website. You can go on there and you can give comments after our presentation and make recommendations. Once those recommendations have been done, we will sit down together and we will look at all the feasibilities of if we're increasing or decreasing and what the value thereof is. Once we've done that, we can then recalculate everything and see which is appropriate or if it is at all possible to increase or decrease certain sectors. But it's the input from the audience and the people out there watching that is going to make that difference. Thank you.
Yeah, I think Nick's question is a very pertinent one, and it's one that's come up before. And yeah, it's important that these kinds of questions are posed to the forum in order for us to go back and deliberate on the merits or the demerits of a particular recommendation, bearing in mind that if we propose a particular review of a certain threshold, we need to also provide a rationale for that to the Department of Trade and Industry and Competition in order for them to apply their minds in terms of our argument, either in favor or against the particular position that we take as a sector.
Yes, thank you for that question. I just want to add there are other sector codes that have also lowered their threshold, annual threshold, and one of them is the tourism sector. And the motivation or the rationale why the tourism sector lowered their threshold was if they did a benchmark, they looked at their industry, at the tourism industry, and they said if we keep it at 10 million, the majority of our companies, and here they're talking about the small, medium enterprises, would be exempted from doing anything in terms of BEE. So the answer really is, and I'm also saying this to Nick, Nick, you must strongly motivate that in your industry, it will still, if we raise the threshold to 10 million, it will still ensure that the vast majority of companies in your industry will have to do something around BEE and transformation, right? So that is really the rationale why this forum has chosen to lower the threshold, right? Because anybody or any company that makes revenue less than 10 million is automatically exempted from doing anything on BEE and automatically gets if they're white-owned, automatically gets a BE level 4 status. So that's the reason why the forum, and I remember that when we were discussing it, that was in 2012, why the threshold was lowered to 5 million. So Nick, strong motivation.
I just want to bring a slightly additional perspective to this. Nick, I know Nick very well, and thank you for asking that question. It's a great one. Julia has already, given some sort of perspective on the fact that a lot of the business that's happening locally is in that threshold, and no transformation will take place if the threshold is not adjusted. But I think, for the purpose of those who are attending this session today, I'd like to just light a little candle in your mind and in your heart. The fact that we are so unequal is a historic reality. And us as a South African nation, we've got a collective responsibility to rebalance this inequality. And if it means that the slightly smaller operators who perhaps choose to stay small, but they start off with a skewed advantage, don't want to elaborate too much, but you can connect the dots. It will encourage you guys in that particular threshold to also actively participate from a positive perspective, rather than feel punished. Rather understand there is the collective responsibility that we have as a nation to change our status quo and start looking for potential partners, black partners with skills. Look for partnerships. Start a small business and look for black partners, which will, fulfill your little role in your corner towards that common responsibility that we have as a nation. So I want to encourage, people who are participating in this, don't see B-BBEE as some kind of punishment against those who have, to, just advantage those who don't have. See it as a collective responsibility and a reality that has to deliver us to a certain destination of more equality in terms of economic participation. And then just do your bit. Thanks.
Just to reiterate the point that Julia had made earlier about the motivation. Yes, as you had seen from our presentation, we're saying this is a draft document. This is the reason why we are here, to get more feedback and input from you. This document, it's not final until such time that we've incorporated your inputs into it. So you are allowed and you are welcome to make any proposal and suggestion, and please give motivation for whatever proposal changes that you're making, as we have done.
Thank you so much. I just want to go back to a point that Opa raised in terms of the forum being set as well to ensure that there'll be some sort of compliance. And I just want to ask, because currently a lot of black, or not even black, but a lot of film producers are facing challenges just generally with using small black-owned suppliers in terms of ensuring that they're compliant, the paperwork, managing them. Will that forum, or is there some sort of a system or a structure that will be in place to also lower the paperwork? Because I mean, think about it, a black-owned supplier, just making sure that they compliant already is a challenge and an issue, and the management around there. Will there be some sort of a structure that will be in place, or a system that the forum will ensure that the process of them being compliant is still there, but yet the paperwork is also being decreased on their side as well?
Very good question. I was trying to signal that we'd like to have your name, but it's okay. I'll give you the mic next time. Is there anybody in the forum who would like to answer that question?
So that's Ayanda, the SG for the IPO, just for the record. And yeah, Ayanda, that issue has been a burning issue with us as the film and TV sector. And it basically, with the amendment to the DTIC rebate scheme in 2018, production companies were obliged to procure 20% of goods and services from 51% majority black-owned companies who'd been in operation as such for more than a year. And so what we had to do, and I was actually on a major tricontinental co-production at the time in 2019 as the executive in charge of vetting black-owned suppliers for our submissions to the rebate office. And what we did is we then set up a database administered by Film Africa, which film producers can access free of charge. And Film Africa has very kindly donated the time and the HR personnel to administer updating the compliance documents of, I think, in excess of 158 BE suppliers on that database to reduce the compliance burden for producers. And we've also shared that database with the DTIC to ensure that there is an existing established database of suppliers that can be utilized under the category of enterprise development if companies want to partner with those suppliers, and that they also have a established track record in terms of being able to deliver on the goods and services that might need to be procured. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for that question, and I also think it's very important. Thank you for the question, but I also think it's very important that, in this case, the film industry and all the industries, that transformation is a responsibility that we must all carry, right? So although the small enterprises that are, in your case, if they're 100% black-owned and their revenue stays under 50 million annually, they are exempted in the fact that they do not have to do anything. They get an automatic BEE status, right? So that's one thing. So I think a lot of burden of compliance to BEE has been taken away from 100% black-owned companies or even the 51% black-owned companies. So there's no need for heavy compliance in terms of BEE. The other companies, I think their role is also to ensure that there is, that we bring a lot of what we would say informal companies, bring them into the formal space and assist them in that. So it's really a collective effort, like the panelist also said. So I totally applaud what you just said, what you've had in place, you know, that suppliers are assisted in so many ways just to become formalized. So I think, you know, that should answer that question. Now I've got a question from the floor and I've got a question online. So I'd like to take the floor first and then I will refer to the question online so that we can handle two questions.
Yeah, I'd like to ask what the relationship of this council going to be with government funding structures like the NAC. I mean, we've heard and have experienced where you have the same organizations having funding over and over. And also, will this council have some form of whistleblowing forum where there's a call center, et cetera, to highlight these issues?
From online, there was a question. Let me see. And the question is from Ms. Jackie Mutsepe of the KZN Film Commission. Her question is as follows. Attending this meeting for the first time, I wanted to inquire whether proposals are in consultation with the BEE Commission. And the second question is, what are the expected negative effects of this BEE intervention as mentioned?
Which proposals are these?
Any proposals, you know, she wanted to inquire whether proposals are in consultation, whether the proposals that probably come from the floor, whether we will also consult with the BEE Commission on the questions that are raised. I think that is what is meant here. So whether we will have, or you will have consultations with the BEE Commission. And then the second one was, what are the expected negative effects of this BEE intervention mentioned, as mentioned? And then Jackie also asked if she could kindly get a copy of the document. But they are on the document is online on the DSAC website for now. I hope that answered that question.
So to answer the first question is that, yes, I mean, there are already hotline within the DTIC, for example, where you can report issues of fronting or non-compliance or concern anonymously. So those mechanisms are in place in the event that you are aware of a particularly distressing situation with regards to BEE compliance. And I think that, you know, from our experience as the AV sector, we've not had many reports coming via that hotline in terms of violation of any compliance requirements in our sector, but those facilities do exist. And I think that that will be elevated once the BEE Council the Charter Council is in place, because then there will be an avenue for direct engagement on issues of non-compliance, because that council will issue a BEE verification certificate to companies that are compliant on an annual basis. And so the data collated will also be used to track the targets that have been set and the attainment of those targets over a period of a couple of years to see how transformation has actually been effected or not been effected. So I hope that answers your question.
The first part was about the relationship with the council.
Yeah. So you raise what's currently a very topical and burning issue as recently as yesterday on this merger between key agencies in the AV sector, like the NFVF and the National Arts Council. And from what we've heard is that this is a done deal. And so therefore, if once those mergers happen, because this is under the remit of the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, and those agencies also are under the ambit of DSAC, obviously there will need to be quite extensive engagement, and we're hoping that this process will also facilitate us being able to raise key issues of concern that have been highlighted over the years in terms of the operations and the functions and the budget expenditure and allocations to certain functions as opposed to investment in production and development funding by those agencies in the development of content. So I think that that's going to have to be a key aspect of our engagement, because how that investment is done and monitored will also determine how the council then is able to evaluate the compliance targets in terms of transformation. I don't know if somebody else wants to answer Jackie's question on the forum.
Just before we go that, I think it is paramount that we try to prevent. It's still premature for us to be discussing issues of the council. If you listen to the presentation properly, which was done by the chairperson, it speaks specifically on issues related to the transformation and dealing with codes. And up until that process is complete, it's only then that we can begin to see what will happen. And you must understand, this is South Africa. After 29th of May, things might change. And therefore, let's try and zoom into the presentation and try to go as far as any other aspect of it before we look at what will happen after. I know anything that has got funding, especially to black people, hey, it's an issue. Yeah. Thanks.
I think the BE Commission, I mean, the question was really, well, will there be consultation? And in terms of the proposals, and I think obviously there will be, because the BE Commission is the DTIC, so before, you know, this is following the guidelines, how you get to a Section 12. So all the questions will be in a report, like we said, clear motivation. To just say, I don't like it, won't work. All right, so you'll have to motivate and give good reasoning. And then also you'll get a response back, why it is the way it is. And like I said, this has been in making for more than 12 years. So there has been ample opportunity for people to engage with the forum on these issues. I also think we are now 30 years, as China says, we are 30 years into our democracy now. So there are certain things, like I've always said during my presentations, there are 3 things in life: tax, death, and BEE. So, I mean, we're here now. All right. So I think I've answered the BEE, if the forum is happy with that. On the negative consequence, but there are no negative consequences.
I think we just need to unpack that particular question. And quite frankly, as far as my experience has been working as a producer and production manager for an established production company that was dealing with an issue of repudiation and subsequently cleared, is that there can't possibly be more disastrous consequences than what we were subject to with the application of the generic BEE scorecard requirements in 2022 with our member companies, as I indicated earlier on. And I think that but I don't see any negative consequences for our sector, because this public consultation process will determine the validity and integrity of the proposed targets and weightings as per your input and your rationale and motivation. And so it's not cast in stone. It's a work in progress, and it will be informed by your input and experience, and that can't possibly be have any negative consequences in terms of what we've already experienced with the application of the generic B-BBEE scorecard.
Yes, thank you for that. Yes, the chair.
But I also needed to get clarity on the question that was asked earlier about the relationship we'll assume with the National Arts Council or NFVEF. Was this in relation to
Funding.
the forum facilitating access to funding?
Yeah.
Am I understanding you correctly?
Yeah, well, it's more related to streamline and also make sure that companies that are compliant have access to funding, and that is rules.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, the principle of
Yeah, I think my colleagues have covered that one, and I just wanted to add to it that, as China had mentioned, that we are here specifically to talk about these sector codes. And we don't have influence whatsoever to what other entities or government departments do. We have no control, and we cannot even facilitate a meeting or I'm just using that weird term deliberately so that you understand how far distant we are from those aspects. Our issues here are the development of codes, and that's all we're doing. Once we have implemented that, of course, with your input, that becomes law and will come into play only at the time when we monitor and ensure the compliance by entities that are operational in our sector. And as someone had mentioned, I think it was Quentin also, a question about the effects, the negative effects of the BE. I must mention, colleagues, that as you can see, the diversity of this forum here, there's 3 other colleagues of us who are not here. There's a lot of pushback from many different sectors and quarters regarding this. And this is what, as the forum, and we are made of association. I mean, if you look at, for instance, SAMPA and SAGI, they would have over 100 members. These are entities that are in each of those companies. And all of them have different profiles and largely black, largely white owned. And so there is a pushback, there is a resistance from some of these entities to transform, to include blacks in their management or in equity. Hence, we've developed this sector code. So that's the negative, the only negative part of it. But we'll all benefit from it if we develop the sector code and get it to the final leg of its finality, which is the law. Once it is there, the government and ourselves as the council are enforced to insist on compliance. So entities that are doing businesses with government that are currently benefiting will not continue to benefit because the law would be taking its course. Thank you.
I think this is a question again to OPA, since OPA, you did the presentation. I know just in terms of the targets, specifically speaking to middle management, you've included to say black junior management is not in the generic scorecard, but it is included in this particular proposal. Sorry, it's Ayanda CBC, sorry. From IPO. I just want to know, and I think obviously it is a great thing to know that the black junior management is something that is being included in this particular proposed scorecard. But my question is, how will that be measured, and specifically measured across the sector?
You want to take it?
Thank you so much for your question, Aganda. It's very important. And yes, when we're speaking about lower management, middle management, higher management, it also talks to something in the scorecard in which OPA spoke about, which is about skills development. And the only way that people are going to reach those managerial levels is by skills developing or developing and growing within that organization. And that is why we've included it, and it works hand in hand. So although they're separate columns or separate entities within the document, the one will affect the other. So the only way that you can grow somebody into a higher management position is bringing them in and starting them pretty much in lower level management, finding people with potential, giving them the opportunities to grow and develop. And that is how we wrote the entire document, that it is, you will start as a lower level management, you will learn the skills on how to, well, obviously do your job, but at the same time grow and develop other people. And the more you grow and develop other people, the higher up you can move. And once you move upwards in that chain, you will then be able to reach higher levels of management. And that eventually will lead to people that are proficient, experienced, as well as fulfill the equality levels within any organization by merit. And that is what we're looking for. We want skilled people. We don't want people that are just put in a position as a fronting exercise. We want people that are there because they can do the job. So we've said, let them start as the lower level management. And obviously within the organization, how that is going to be measured is by their scorecards when they submit it to BEE. So if they are over a 50 million company, they're going to have audits. And once those audits are done, you will very clearly see who is complying with the management and who isn't complying, and with skills developments and so forth. But it does definitely work hand in hand. So it's all about lifting somebody up into an elevated position, as well as giving them the skills, knowledge, and expertise to do their job. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Thank you, Leanne, for that. And I just want to go a little bit, answer also technical. When you develop a sector code, the Act will say that you may deviate from targets and weightings from the generic. You must, however, set targets that are over and above the minimum targets as set by the generic codes of good practice. So you are never allowed to go under. You must always go above. And the proposed sector codes may also deviate and introduce a new additional element for measurement where such addition is justifiably based on sound economic principles, sectorial characteristics, or empirical research. So I think, again, here, the forum really looked at the sector, looked where the challenges are, looked where the gaps are, and that's why they introduced this additional element. So I hope from a technical perspective, I've also answered that question.
Neslan Duta, freelancer in the film sector. I don't necessarily have a question, just to touch on what we're speaking about now, about middle management. I know the SF Film Academy and Film Africa, they're working on something called the Crew Collective. They've sent out an email to industry practitioners that are experienced, that are ready to step into HOD roles. And since they predominantly work with international companies, a lot of these CVs are sent to HODs that are overseas, and a lot of black people don't have access to that. So Crew Collective now is going to become this portal where black people can be able to have their CVs in front of these international HODs so that they can be able to access middle management positions. So the SL Film Academy has done a lot of work in getting this to happen. So if anyone is in the film sector here and they're interested in that, they could go to crewcollective.org.za. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
There was also a question we received in relations to non-profit organizations, and because there seems to be a lot also in your sector. For the non-profit organizations, I'd like to refer those companies to a specialized, they're called specialized entity statement. And that statement is, if people have pen and paper ready, 38766. It was introduced as phase 2. And what specialized entity means is that those entities cannot be managed on or measured on ownership, because they don't have ownership, right? They don't issue shares. So they have their own separate scorecard, so they need to look at that. You won't find it in our sector code, but anything that is not in our sector code, you will always have to go back to the generic. So that's how it will work. So they, MPOs, non-profit organization, any schools, the film school, for instance, that you have set up, they get measured under what we call the specialized entity scorecard. So I hope I answered that question. Just another question that we also received, just to emphasize again, I think I went a bit fast. So there are actually 4 types of entities. There is what they call the exempted micro enterprises. So in this case, those are enterprises based on your revenue. If your revenue is less than 5 million, you're an EME, and you're automatically exempted from being measured on any scorecard. You get an automatic BEE status, 100% black-owned EME, automatically level 1, and that's the best you can get. An EME that is 51% black-owned gets automatically level 2, and any other EME gets an automatic level 4. Then you have the qualified small enterprise, same there, 100% black-owned, automatically BEE level 1, 51% black-owned, automatically BEE level 2. If you are, and those are enterprises that have revenue between 10 or 5 in our case, 5 and 50 million annual income revenue. If you don't have 51% black ownership, but let's say 40%, or you just gave 20%, or you're just 100% white owned, a qualified small enterprise, then you need to measure yourself on what we call the qualified small enterprise scorecard. You'll have to go to a verification agency and they will measure you. And you will then get measured, not as harshly as under the generic, but you do get measured on the 5 elements that we mentioned, right? Ownership, management control, skills, procurement, and socio-economic. And then you've got what we call the generic, or the large companies. Those are the companies that have revenue of more than 50 million annually. They will always need to be measured, right? So that's really how it goes. And a lot of people always have this idea that BEE affects only white-owned companies. I've got a little story. I had a client who walked into my, well, I don't really have a boardroom, but anyway, he asked advice from me, and he was an African gentleman, had a security company, very successful. He was an EME. Then he became a QSE, but because he was 100% black owned, he was doing very well. He grew, and that's what we want to see, of course, and he started to make more than 50 million annually. And now he had to be measured on the generic scorecard. And he was quite perturbed to be measured under the generic scorecard because he felt he was 100% black owned, which he was. But if you go into the code, you'll have a look. Yes, he was 100%, so equity was 100%, but he had no females that owned any equity, so he didn't get his full points on ownership. He did not have a employee trust or broad-based trust, so he did not score his full point under ownership. When we looked at management control, it was a very male-driven company, of course, security company. I think only the receptionist was female and maybe the tea lady. So he didn't score very well under management control as well because there were only gentlemen walking around. Plus another thing that generic companies also need to be aware of. When we speak about black people, we speak about African, colored, and Indian. And that must also be representative in your space. The gentleman, again, didn't score very well on management control. Skills development, on average, you need to spend 6% of your payroll on skills, on skilling of your employees and non-employees. We say skilling of black people. So you either spend 6% of your payroll on your employees or you skill learners. Very important is also the CETAs. I think that is also important for this industry, that all companies, if you want to get any learnership, mandatory grants, but most importantly, if you want to score any points under skills development, you need to produce what they call a work skills plan with your relevant CETA. That was also, there were some gaps there. Procurement, well, we know procurement, he needed to think, who am I procuring stuff from? Am I just going to quickly rush to Woolworths, or am I going to, for some scones, or am I going to engage with people who have a much higher empowerment status? And then socioeconomic. So I'm just trying to illustrate that actually this affects everybody, and I'm trying to illustrate it also to various black people in this industry and many industry I've engaged with. The idea is not to remain exempt. The idea is not for you to remain small. The idea is for you to grow and become powerful. So that's my little contribution on that one. Yes?
I just want to add on to what Julia is saying about the different levels and grades of people within the BEE codes. So if you look on the document, you might see there's a whole heap of statistical calculations there that will look like Greek to you. That's okay. It looks like Greek to most people. But what that statistical calculation is based on the fact that if you are a black female, you get X amount of points, and then that gives you a certain advantage or a higher scale than what if you are a coloured woman. The same with an Indian man, a coloured man, and a black man. They've all got different scores, and those scores will equate into higher points or lower points, just so that you understand their calculations.
There's a question that I got online just now, again from Nick Kluter. There's really only two ways for any industry to transform: designated groups starting their own businesses or finding job opportunities with other businesses. So if transformation is the goal, shouldn't companies be awarded points for creating jobs for black people? It is in there. Maybe as an item within management control. Similarly, shouldn't definitely receive more points than leveragable learning programs or in skills development, because nothing enhances growth more than on the job learning. And I know it is intended to encourage more proportional representation, but aren't we complicating the scorecard with prescribing specific racial groups and sexes? Should it matter so long as the benefiting black designated groups? Aren't we just making it more difficult for companies to comply or achieve points? Thank you, Nick. I think you could answer the skills development one. Thank you, Leanne.
It's a very controversial comment. Yeah, it's a very...
But we can answer.
It is. I'll answer what I can answer. I'm not going to go too much in depth. The fact that there are different denominations of sexes and races and points within that is due to the level of inequality, and I'm just going to leave it there. For procurement, as it was announced, yes, that is a way to grow your business and to grow your points as a BEE organization. So if you are a 50 million plus organization, it is vital that if you get a company or a government tender, that you procure the use of other black-owned companies. And this is a way for the smaller companies to grow. They get employment, they get contacts, they are able to show what they can do, and this is the opportunity for the smaller companies. If it's a large event, as an example, I'm in the Eventing Association, so an event cannot happen without outside people. So we have to procure people, and if you then procure complete black-owned people, you will get higher points. And that will also then equate to larger points and a higher BE level. In terms of skills and development, we are all very passionate about that. So you've seen a large growth in skills and development because it is something I'm going to hand over to Quinton. I think he's jumping up and down in his seat to answer the question. But skills development is vital to us. Because that means, again, as I said, I'm repeating myself, it means that it's a way to take away fronting, it's a way to bring people and uplift them so that they have the confidence, the skill, and the know-how to go out and do the best possible job that they can do. But I'm going to leave Quinton now because, as I say, I can feel the heat radiating.
I don't know what heat Leanne's talking about, but I mean, this is a key issue that's come up in our sector and across all sectors of the economy. And so just to quote some very basic statistics that as we speak at the moment, 30 years into our democracy, 70% of all senior executive management on companies listed on the JSE are white males. And I think that that's a demographic representation across most sectors of the economy. And so the delineation of specific categories of people in our society, particularly black women at different levels of management and the advancement of that sector, because we know that under apartheid, black women bore a triple burden of oppression in terms of the migration of black men from the household and the family that essentially destabilized those institutions so vital to the development of healthy children and young people under the migrant labor system. And these are the realities that we are trying to address, particularly in our sector, for example, where the representation of senior black crew has been an issue with regards to opportunity and coherent career paths, which the SA Film Academy and our sector and our MOU is trying to address in terms of looking at what is available to us in terms of skills development. How do we track the career path of black professionals, and how do we monitor and determine whether a person has attained a certain level of competency that allows them to be equally remunerated on an equitable level with their white counterparts in a particular sector, in the live events and technical production services sector. So these are issues, I think, that haunt us as a legacy of underdevelopment under apartheid. And even 30 years into our democracy, we're still struggling with that issue of representation. And it's something that the scorecard has paid particular attention to, because as we speak, there's something like 3 billion rand in the National Skills Fund. And the reason why there's that surplus is that companies in the private sector have not been willing to take up the opportunity for learning programs or skills programs or learnerships that give particularly young people the opportunity to gain access to a sector and to develop a coherent career path. And that money is there as a surplus from the skills development levies that have been paid over into the National Skills Fund. So I think when we look at these anomalies, we need to recognize that our scorecard has to take cognizance of these issues if we are going to track transformation as per the NFVF's findings in 2021, that management representation at lower levels and entry level is proceeding apace, but at senior and executive management level, it's lagging far behind. So that's what the scorecard is actually trying to address. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more questions from the floor? Sorry? The website? Oh, you're waiting for questions to receive. Oh, the website. Maybe I should just hand him the mic then. The question was, you mentioned the website crew.
Oh yes, it's www.crewcollective.org.za. So it's www.crewcollective.org.za.
Leanne? Yeah. Are there any questions that have come from your end? Otherwise, thank you so much. I expected a bit more questions. We came prepared, ne, from Joburg. In relation to ownership calculations, there seemed to be, from the IPO, there were some issues around that, but I think that has been solved in regards how we came to the weighting. No more questions on that side. I then like to give the mic to the foreign members. If they, let's go ahead and transform. Let's go ahead and diversify and make this happen. Absolutely. Any of the foreign members who'd like to give a closing before I hand it to the chair to give a closing? All right.
I just want to say that, you know, there is a perception, particularly in our sector, that I want to correct, that we have been unwilling to engage with transformation. And I think that if one had to actually do a review of the number of companies in our sector that now have black ownership, that have senior black management represented in those agencies, I think it would paint a very different picture. And so for me, I feel that this scorecard is something that particularly in our sector, our member companies could easily work towards achieving these targets because there are already existing initiatives, like you've mentioned, our MOU with the SA Film Academy, our professional designation process with Sakia that we've invested in as the IPO that we're going to be rolling out. And I think that we can do great things together in terms of actually showing government and other stakeholders exactly the extent to which we have been engaged in transformation. All that is really required is for that to be quantified and measured against the staff scorecard. Thank you.
We were not aware of that perception, but if it does exist, it's not going to fly. As Chairperson indicated, we're in the process, you are with us, or you face consequences. So deal with it, my brother.
Yeah, from my side, just going back to the whole issue that the Chair mentioned earlier of that there is pushback. And sort of tying in with Nick's comments around, job creation. Yes, of course, we need to create jobs. But those jobs, we're coming from a history of bosses generally and owners were white and the laborers and the workers were black. It's a reality. We have to all collectively acknowledge that and say that that is essentially also what has to be transformed. It's not just about giving black people jobs, as long as the decisions and the major economic benefits are experienced by a white handful. It has to transform right through in terms of ownership and decision making. That's what these codes are intended to do. That will give us the equality, economic equality in years to come.
Sorry to interrupt, but there is a question online that just came in. Sorry about that. This is what happens when you have this live, virtual, AI kind of stuff. Andile, a chairperson of the Independent Director Association of Africa, he said, I can't quite hear, the sound is a bit bad, but referencing to Nick's question, given the substantial difference in turnover threshold between this events code and the generic code and the MEC Charter, what specific measures or adjustments could be implemented to potentially raise the threshold to 10 million, thereby aligning it with the generic, and what potential impacts or benefit might this adjustment have on businesses operating within the production services industry? Sorry about that, Andile, but the question was kind of answered. But I don't know if any of the forum member wants to.
No, it has been answered.
It has been answered. It really, very briefly, you're not the only sector that has lowered the threshold from 10 to 5. The tourism industry has done exactly the same. And the reason why the tourism industry and the reason why this industry is doing exactly the same is because otherwise the majority of companies operating in this sector would be exempted from doing anything in relation to BE. So I hope I've answered your question. Sorry about that. I think that was the last question. I'm closing the online. I'm just going to ask, are there any questions still coming through? Once, going once, twice, sold.
Freddie.
So I have to walk in front, but it's an honor. It's an honor.
For me, from the South African Roadies Association's background as a training organization, we realized that there is no way that you can implement skills development in our industry without in an untransformed environment. That's what led us to push that there had to be a scorecard or some transformation in the industry. Because especially on the technical side, coming from the apartheid era, we as black people on the technical side, we were deprived the opportunity of access to training, even for on-the-job training exercise. So with this initiative, we hope that that will make things easy and the companies in the sector, especially white-owned technical companies, will embrace this transformation charter and support skills development, because that's the key. Without knowledgeable, skilled technical and production personnel, there is no way that the industry will grow. So it's a win-win situation for everyone if we embrace and support skills development. Thank you.
That was a beautiful closing. Thank you. Thank you for that. And I think hereby, I'm looking at the camera, but I think if the camera could just do a last bird view. How do you call it in camera? Panorama? Oh, it's a pan. It's a pan. If we could get a pan of the forum. And hereby, we'd like to close this session. Thank you so much for the people who made the effort to be here with us today. And we are still here, so if there are any questions, just tap on our shoulders. Thank you, forum members. We came from far. We flew. It was something getting here, but we're here. Thank you so much, Invest SA, for great hosting. Of course, thank you to the Department of Science, Technology, Arts and Culture. And with that, I think I will close this session. Thank you so much. Thank you, Cape Town. Bye-bye. Pretty close.